Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of What Did the Patient Say with Doctors Dana and Lauren Brindisi, sisters and owners of Carolina Functional Neurology Center. We are bringing you inside information from real conversations we have with patients on a daily basis. We get asked the same questions and want to spread the truth on health and healing because we believe everyone deserves to know the answers.
Welcome back to another episode of What Did the Patient Say? Today we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk condition specific about concussions, which is a majority of our practice. We do see a lot of patients who have had concussions, which are mild traumatic brain injuries, and we also see patients who have had traumatic brain injuries. And what we really want to talk about is a topic that continues to come up for both of us in practice. We hear all too often when patients come in that they have been advised to rest and wait, go in a dark room, hide away, and hope that things get better. But we want you to know, gone are those days of just resting and waiting. Most of the research and some newer information that's coming out is really pointing to the idea that getting out and doing something about it, seeking help, getting rehab is going to be your best bet for making the best recovery. So we want to spend a little time breaking that down and talking to you a little bit about the things that we do.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. I think that understanding that these parameters are not a one size fits all parameter, but that there are certain steps that people can take. And, if you're a brain injury patient, you may not be the one that's watching this. It might be one of your family members, right? And just seeking answers, because at some point, a lot of people are told just hang in there, right? Time is what's going to help you. But in reality, when you understand how the brain works, how the brain heals, how the brain functions, we know that doing something is going to be almost always in the right capacity better than doing nothing. So I think one of the biggest things that people are told is, obviously we, in certain cases and in the beginning, we limit screen time, we limit the amount of activity people are being exposed to, light, sound, all of that. And that's reality. But that is not a lifetime, response to trying to recover from a concussion. So we want to give you guys some info. And again, it's specific to the patient. So I think one of the biggest things we talk about with our patients is the amount of physical activity. And, we hear a lot about concussions when we're talking about athletics and sports and all of that. But the reality of it is most of the concussions are coming from people who fall, people who get into a car accident, things like that. So people who bang their head on, the freezer door as they come up from getting something out of the refrigerator, right? These day-to-day things that happen. And, most people, you should recover from a concussion in about 14 days, right? Like most people's brains should be able to have that inflammatory response happen and move you forward. But if after that point, you're becoming more symptomatic or your symptoms are not getting any better, that's where you really do need to seek help. And a lot of questions come to us from a physical standpoint. So I was told to just rest and lay down, but we know that our brains need the input from gravity, right? So the more sedentary you are, and especially the more you lay flat, is even different than just sitting upright in your bed versus laying down, right? Our brains need that input in order to continue to fire and function appropriately. So, and again, this looks different for everybody. Sorry, I'm going on a little tangent here, but people talk about how much exercise can I do, right? And a lot of people are like, I used to exercise and now I used to run marathons and now I can barely, walk around the block. What's the right protocol for me? And I think a lot of what we say to our patients is it's specific to you, and everything that you're doing should be beneficial. Meaning if you can walk for 5 minutes and it's not increasing your symptoms, then that's a good place to start. But if you walk for 20 minutes and you have a headache, you're super fatigued, you can't get out of bed for 3 days, even if you're used to run marathons, that 20-minute walk is still too much for your brain. But that doesn't mean we don't want you walking or moving. We just need to find that sweet spot for you and then build on that.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a tough one for a lot of patients. And, I feel like I have that conversation over and over again, especially with my athletes or especially with people that are super active. They always want to get back to where they were, right?
Yeah.
And people get really focused on that, even from a mental perspective. Well, I used to be able to do this, but it's different once you've had a brain injury. So there are things we need to do to push that line forward, and not keep trying to exceed that line, because that line gets pushed down and then you're in bed for 3 days. I do think, that's a really, really important factor when it comes to concussion rehab in general. But definitely not laying around and resting, and especially not for months and months. I just had a patient say that their doctor told them to wait 6 months. I just could not, I was shocked. I go, that's not what the newer information is saying. And just like Dr. Dana said, 2 weeks, that's it. And you definitely, that's kind of max, or you need to be seeking some type of help. Somebody that's going to help you, even if it's just as simple as a exercise regimen for you. Just like Dr. Dana said, it's got to be in a capacity that you can handle. And that's what's really tricky for concussions too, I feel like, because it is very individualized. And in a lot of traditional medicine, we're dealing with protocols for conditions.
Yeah.
And with something like a concussion, there's not a cookie cutter protocol for
No brain injury. They're like snowflakes.
Yeah.
No brain injury is created equal.
Yeah. And while, we start to uncover more information about rehab methods that can be helpful, the timing, the frequency, all of those things change per person, and exactly what you need, right? Even we do a lot of eye movement therapies and vestibular rehabs for patients, but it's not just, oh, I'm having trouble with my eye movements, so let's just practice your eye movements over and over again.
Yes.
It has a lot to do with what area of the brain is breaking down in that pathway of that
Especially
eye movement.
if those eye movements are making them symptomatic. Like a lot of times we see patients that have seen other people and they've been given similar therapies and they leave treatment and they feel bad. I'm like, you should not feel bad. If anything, you feel nothing, right? And it's the cumulative effect of what you're doing, but you should definitely not leave a rehab facility and feel bad, because what that means is the capacity for your brain to handle that stimulation has been blown out of the water, right? And it's so, to be clear, it's not just about exercise, right? It's about anything that you're doing. I keep thinking about, as you're talking, a patient that, we've been working with for several months. Significant concussion. And we ended up actually pulling her out of work temporarily because the screen time for her, right? And we were working on stabilizing her eye movements, but also understanding that we're getting a lot of, stimulation from the blue light that we get from our screens, but also she works from home. She's got 3 computers going on. She's in meetings. Some of them she has to lead. Some of them she has to take all these notes, right? And she couldn't be on a meeting on her computer for more than like 20 minutes tops when we started, right? And we're going through treatment and it kept going. And she started to realize like, okay, I can handle an hour, but once I get to that point, I need to shut everything off. I need to take a time out and then I can go back, because you can give your brain some rest and then give it some more stimulation and you can push yourself forward. It's almost like, it is kind of like a workout, right? And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's just, you would never not work out for years and then go try to win a bodybuilding competition, right? It's not going to work that way, right? You've got to build that stamina up, and your brain works that way, whether you're talking about physical exercise, whether you're talking about stimulation from eye movements or driving in a car or whatever it is, right? And it's like, you just want to keep increasing that time that you can handle the stimulation without it driving the symptoms that you have. And if you are driving the symptoms that you have, then whatever that task is that you're kind of challenging yourself to do is too much. And we got to either tone down the frequency, right, of which you're doing it, or the duration of time at which you're doing it during that frequency.
Yeah, I feel like I'm having that conversation over and over again with patients. The rest is just as important as the actual stimulus. And I think to a good point that you brought up is people think about, when we talk about exercising and exercising the brain, people think about physical exercise.
Yeah.
But the reality is everything that you're taking in through your senses is stimulation to your brain, and that's exercise to your brain. Mm-hmm. So after a head injury, things that maybe, you were taking for granted before, being able to get in the car and drive to work, being able to sit on the computer for hours at a time, or, scrolling on your phone for hours, not even thinking about it, is now very, very activating for your brain and could be pushing that line too far. So we're always talking about things like limiting screen time, but in a capacity that's appropriate for you, not go hide in a dark room and lay down and just totally eliminate all stimuli. The stimulus is important, but it's what the stimulus is that's very important. And that can be very different per person, depending on what brain regions really need the most exercise. So that's why what we do as functional neurologists is all about customizing that treatment plan, and then talking about things about your lifestyle. Do you need to be taken out of work for a period of time? Should you stop scrolling on your phone, looking through Instagram and things like that? We maybe need to limit those. Do you need to try to work from home, especially now? It's a blessing in disguise. I think a lot of people have that flexibility. So if something like getting in the car is so challenging for you, how do we adjust your lifestyle for a period of time to push that line forward and get you back to the things that you were doing, or get you to a new normal that's hopefully in a better place than maybe you even were before the concussion? Because even the education and the understanding of how your brain works, I talk about that a lot too, because sometimes for patients, a concussion can be a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because before, a lot of times maybe they were just pushing themselves over and over and over again to their limits, and they were able to kind of power through, but they were just living a life that was really exceeding what they could handle, and they were just going through the motions. And when they have to sit down and really reevaluate all the things that they're doing, it allows them the opportunity, as they get better, to readjust those things and really take their own health, especially their own brain health, into consideration when they're making decisions on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also for people to know, obviously our first approach is never to just say yep, stop work, stop school, do that, right? We don't want that for people if they don't have to. Yeah. But I think what people also need to understand is you may have to scale back on something so that you can move your recovery forward. Because what happens is, again, to your point, everything is stimulus to the brain. So one, we take some of that stuff for granted before we had a head injury. So simple tasks like, getting in the car or making dinner or, looking at your phone for a second or watching a movie, right? You don't think about those as stimulation to the brain, but once you have a brain injury, then you start to recognize how taxing those things can be. But I think the conversation, and I think collectively, we've probably only taken a handful of people out of work or school, but the conversation that I always have in those scenarios is that we want you to get better as quickly as you can. And if something like work or school is inhibiting your recovery just because it's so much stimulus for you, then it's worth a timeout for a minute if it's possible, to then get you treated so that you can go back to doing what you're doing, right? Like the patient that I was talking about, she's back at work. She's back at work full time. She still is making some accommodations in her day to day, but she went from being completely out of work and now she's back to work full time. So it's like she allowed her brain the opportunity to recover without having that additional stimulus, kind of flaring her symptoms up and getting in her way of moving forward. So
yeah, kind of prolonging that process.
yeah.
And that looks different for everybody, based on, what they do for work, what their lifestyle is, how the concussion has affected them. But either way, something needs to be done, especially like Dr. Dana said, that number of definitely 14 days. Anything after that, seek some help, talk to some people, figure out what the best route is going to be for you. Because often we see patients years, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, 20 years sometimes or more. We see patients who have dealt with concussions, and then often at that point it's a cumulative in which they have now have had multiple concussions, with little to no help from a professional who's trained in these things.
And then, like we were talking about on a previous episode, all the stress that comes along with that, right? Stress doesn't help your brain recover, and you're trying to push through these symptoms, and then you're being stressed by trying to push through those symptoms and do all of these things that you need to do. Like, get the help now, but also make sure that it's not just a blanket, like, here's your concussion program, and this person's doing the same thing and this person's doing the same thing. Like, have somebody that can give you a personalized protocol, but also specialize what you're doing at home. How much are you doing physical activity? How long are you sleeping? When are you going to bed? When are you waking up? Right? Are you having screen time? Do you do that in the morning versus, in the evening?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is it better to walk or run?
Yeah. I just had this conversation, and I think, in future episodes, we're definitely going to kind of deconstruct this in a little more detail.
Yeah.
But we often run an adrenal stress index test where we're looking at salivary cortisol. And often we see patients have fluctuations or changes in their cortisol output, especially due to a head trauma, right? So there's things that we can do to customize in terms of the activities you're doing on a daily basis, just like Dr. Dana said, right? Do we need your cortisol? We want your cortisol high in the morning. So if it's not spiking in the morning, we want you exercising in the morning. We want you getting on the screens, doing things that's going to be very activating for your brain. Is your cortisol spiking late at night when we don't want it to? Then we really need to be diligent about limiting screen time at night, turning the lights down, promoting a restful night's sleep, doing relaxing activities like, some gentle stretching and yoga and breathing, or some meditation, something that's going to promote restfulness.
Yep.
And maybe that's not appropriate for you in the middle of the day, is maybe when you were doing it before, or maybe you're doing it in the morning, right? We can really gear even the things that are aspects of your lifestyle to benefit you in the best capacity, which might look different to the next person.
Or even vice versa, right? Like, people are crashing in the afternoon and they're like, I can make it to about 2:00 and then I can't do anything after that, right? So like, how do we help them set it up? So maybe at 1, you do a little light exercise, you do something that's maybe a little bit more stimulus so that your brain can get a boost so that you can carry out the rest of your evening. It can go different ways for different people. So
yeah, customizing it. And I think that's what's so fun about our job. And I just love that we have the ability to see patients, and it's not cookie cutter. It's different for everybody. Everybody's different. I love treating patients that way, treating them for who they are as a person and their brain individually, and not just the condition they have.
Yeah. Well, I think the overarching message today that we wanted to get across to everybody is, if you're being told, or you're doing this on your own and you're just like, I think I need to, I should rest. Like, I've heard rest and recover, right, from a brain injury, seek some professional advice to help you with that, because it's not going to benefit you long term. You just need to find the appropriate approach for you and your lifestyle and your brain injury and your nervous system and all of that. So don't just sit around and wait for your brain to get better, because it does need stimulation. It does need fuel. It does need some TLC in order to heal, and just laying in bed is not going to make that happen. And we understand for a lot of people in this position, it's almost like they're in a position where they feel like they can't even get up and do it, right? And so, even scaling that back so much so, right? Like I said in the beginning, it's better to be up than laying flat, so it's like we can start so small and work you up to being able to get up, or maybe some people are doing exercises in their bed.
Yeah, I have a lot of patients doing that. Yeah, like
it
a little
doesn't
morning
have to be.
routine, just flexing and extending their legs, moving their legs around a bit, and their legs above their heart. That's a really common one that I suggest for a variety of patients. But it can be something little, and it's those little foundational things every day. One more thing I want to kind of touch on in terms of that message is there are tons of providers out there, right? Our understanding in neuroscience about concussions is growing exponentially, and there are providers across disciplines that are very well educated and very eager to help patients who have been dealing with traumatic brain injuries. I mean, from functional neurologists to neurooptometrists to naturopaths, integrative medicine, physical therapists, OTs, I mean, counselors, there's everybody. There are options out there. So like Dana said, finding the right fit for you, and don't give up. If you have been kind of through the gamut of providers and you're still struggling, there's so much information out there, and there's a lot that all of us are continuing to learn on a regular basis. So don't give up, keep looking,
and don't accept just wait. Don't accept, time is, and it's true, time, you need time for recovery, but don't accept that as like the end all be all of, I'm just going to wait here and wait for my brain injury to get better.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if, you need some help and you're not sure, reach out to us. We want people to get better, and we want to try to help people find the providers that they need in their area. So definitely let us know, and we'll see.
If you have any other questions, like Dr. Lauren said, we're going to be getting into more of the nitty gritty things that people deal with from different conditions and just as a human being at large. But if you guys have any specific questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can message us on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, like us, subscribe. You guys are really driving these videos, so we want to make sure that we're answering the questions that you have.
Yeah. Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks. See you next time.
Bye.